was folding towels in the laundry room when I heard the car door slam. Not the usual slam, the kind that closes a conversation, the kind that ends something. I looked out the window and saw my daughter's BMW pulling away from the curb, brake lights glowing red in the autumn dusk like two angry eyes staring back at the house. At me. At him. 7-year-old Ben stood on the porch, his Spider-Man backpack still strapped to his shoulders, his hands flapping at his sides the way they did when the world became too loud, too bright, too much. He was rocking slightly, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. Maybe the pattern of leaves on the sidewalk, maybe the rhythm of his own heartbeat. He didn't cry. He never cried the way other children cried. I dried my hands on my jeans and walked to the front door, my heart already knowing what my mind was still refusing to accept. On the porch, tucked under the autumn wreath I'd hung just last week, was a garbage bag. Not a suitcase. A garbage bag. Inside were Ben's clothes, his sensory toys, his weighted blanket with the torn edge he liked to rub between his fingers, and a Ziploc bag of his medication. No note. No explanation. Just the bag and the boy. "Grandma," Ben said, not looking at me, his voice flat and distant like he was reading from a script. "Mom said you're better at this than she is. Better at this." As if raising a child, her child, was a task to be outsourced, a burden to be reassigned. As if loving him was something she'd simply grown tired of trying to do. I knelt down beside him, slowly, careful not to startle him with sudden movement. "Ben, honey, let's go inside. It's getting cold." He didn't respond, just kept staring at that invisible point in space, his fingers moving in small circular patterns against his thighs. I picked up the garbage bag. It was lighter than it should have been, lighter than a childhood should weigh, and guided him gently into the house. That night, I called my daughter 17 times. Every call went to voicemail. Every voicemail I left started with, "Rachel, please," and ended with silence, because I didn't know what else to say. How do you beg someone to love their own child? How do you script that conversation? By midnight, I stopped calling. I sat in Ben's new room, my old craft room, still smelling of lavender and fabric softener, and watched him arrange his toy cars in a perfect line along the windowsill. He organized them by color, then by size, then by color again, his small hands working with the precision of a jeweler. He didn't ask where his mother was. He didn't ask when she was coming back. Maybe he already knew she wasn't. The next morning I received a text. Not a call, a text. 6 words that changed everything. "This is what's best for everyone." I stared at those words until they blurred, until they stopped meaning anything at all. Best for everyone. Everyone except the 7-year-old boy who slept in my craft room with his shoes on, because he was afraid that if he got too comfortable, he'd be moved again. Everyone except the child who lined up his cars every night like soldiers guarding against an invasion of abandonment. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream. But all I felt was this hollow, aching sadness. The kind that settles in your bones and makes you feel older than you are. My daughter, the girl I'd raised to be strong and independent and kind, had just erased her son from her life like he was a mistake she could undo. Like he was a rough draft she could crumple up and throw away. But here's what she didn't know, what she couldn't see through her exhaustion and frustration and shame. Ben wasn't broken. He was just different. And different doesn't mean disposable. I made breakfast that morning. Pancakes cut into perfect squares because Ben couldn't eat them any other way. And I made a promise. To him and to myself. I would be enough. I would be what he needed. I would love him the way his mother should have but couldn't or wouldn't. And I would never, ever make him feel like he was too much. The garbage bag sat in the corner of the kitchen for 3 days before I could bring myself to unpack it. Every time I looked at it, I saw my daughter's face, saw the moment she decided her convenience mattered more than his existence, saw the calculation she must have made, her peace versus his presence. She chose herself, and I chose him. Sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones about the people who were supposed to love us, but walked away instead. If you're still listening, if you're still here with me, hit that subscribe button. I need to know I'm not alone in this. Tell me in the comments what city you're listening from, because right now, I need to remember that somewhere out there, someone understands what it feels like to hold a child someone else threw away. 3 months after Rachel left him, Ben started doing something strange. Stranger than usual, I mean. He'd always had his routines. The car lineup, the square pancakes, the way he had to touch every door frame twice before walking through it. But this was different. He started covering my kitchen table with papers, not drawings, not the colorful scribbles most 7-year-olds make. These were numbers, equations, symbols I didn't recognize, arranged in patterns that looked almost musical, like sheet music written in a language that predated words. At first, I thought he was copying something from a book, maybe something he'd seen on one of those educational YouTube videos he watched on repeat, the ones about space and planets and how black holes bend time. But when I looked closer, I realized the papers were original, his handwriting, his thoughts, his mind unfolding across my grandmother's oak table like a map to somewhere I couldn't follow. Ben, honey, where did you learn to do this? I asked him one afternoon, standing behind his chair, watching his pencil move across the paper with the speed and certainty of someone transcribing a conversation they were hearing in real time. He didn't look up. "The numbers tell me," he said, his voice still flat, still distant. "They're lonely. They want to be together. Lonely numbers." The phrase haunted me. Was that how he felt? Like a lonely number waiting for someone to see where he fit. I took a picture of one of his papers and sent it to my brother, Tom, who taught high school math in Cleveland. His response came 20 minutes later. "Where did you get this? This is college-level calculus, maybe beyond." "My 7-year-old grandson wrote it," I texted back. The phone rang immediately. Tom didn't even say hello. "That's impossible." "Karen, 7-year-olds don't understand derivatives. They barely understand multiplication." "Well, this one does." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, hear the sound of papers rustling in the background. "Send me more," he finally said. "Send me everything he writes." So I did. Every night after Ben went to bed, I'd photograph his papers. Dozens of them now, covering not just the table but the counters, the floor, the windowsill where his cars used to stand guard. I'd send them to Tom, who'd forward them to a friend at Case Western Reserve University, who'd forward them to someone else, and someone else, until Ben's kitchen table mathematics were being examined by people with letters after their names and offices with views. Nobody could explain it. Not the school psychologist who tested him and found his IQ unmeasurable within conventional parameters. Not the neurologist who did brain scans and found unusual activity in regions associated with pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. Not the developmental pediatrician who used the word savant like it was both a diagnosis and an apology. All they knew was that my grandson, the boy his mother had abandoned, saw the world in equations. He heard symphonies in prime numbers. He felt the weight of unsolved problems the way other children felt hunger or cold. And he was lonely. So lonely. Rachel never called to ask about any of it. Not about the tests, not about the specialists, not about the fact that her son was demonstrating cognitive abilities that made grown adults with PhDs stammer and second-guess their careers. She'd removed herself so completely from his life that when the school asked for emergency contacts, her number was no longer in service. She'd changed it. Changed her number so her own son couldn't reach her even if he tried. I stopped trying to understand her. You can't logic your way into someone else's cruelty. You can't rationalize abandonment. You can only clean up after it, which is what I did. I became Ben's mother in every way except biologically. I learned to spot a meltdown 3 minutes before it happened. Learned which textures he could tolerate and which made his skin crawl. Learned to love him not despite his differences, but because of them. He taught me that normalcy is overrated. That the world doesn't need more people who fit in. It needs more people brave enough to stand out, even when standing out means standing alone. On a Tuesday in February, 6 months after Rachel dropped him on my porch, Ben looked up from his papers for the first time in hours. His eyes met mine, actually met mine, which was rare and precious, and he said, "Grandma, I think I understand something important." "What's that, sweetheart?" "The universe is just math trying to solve itself," he said. "And we're the variables." I sat down across from him, my hands folded on the table, tears burning behind my eyes. "That's beautiful, Ben." He went back to his papers, his pencil moving again, and I sat there watching him, this small miracle of a boy, this lonely number who'd found his place at my kitchen table, solving problems the rest of us didn't even know existed. His mother threw him away, but the universe kept him. And I was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, he was going to solve something that would make her regret ever letting him go. The email arrived on a Thursday morning in late April. I almost deleted it. It looked like spam, one of those messages with too many capital letters and an academic email address I didn't recognize. But something made me click it open, maybe the subject line. Regarding Benjamin Torres. Urgent. Dear Mrs. Torres, my name is Dr. Evelyn Park, and I'm a theoretical physicist at MIT. I was forwarded a series of mathematical papers written by your grandson through a colleague at Case Western. I need to speak with you immediately. What Benjamin has written is not just advanced, it's groundbreaking. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Attached was her number, her credentials, and a scanned image of one of Ben's papers with red annotations covering the margins like excited graffiti. My hands were shaking when I dialed. She picked up on the first ring. "Mrs. Torres." "Yes, this is she. I got your email about Ben. Is he really 7 years old?" Her voice was sharp, urgent, the kind of voice that doesn't waste time on pleasantries. "Yes. He just turned 8 last month." Silence. Then a sound like she was exhaling a breath she'd been holding for days. "Mrs. Torres, your grandson has independently derived a variation of the Einstein field equations. Do you understand what that means?" I didn't. Not really. "He's smart, I know that. The doctor said—" "This isn't about being smart," she interrupted. "This is about seeing mathematics that doesn't exist yet. This is about solving problems that people with doctorates have spent lifetimes trying to crack. The paper your brother forwarded, the one with the tensor calculations, that's addressing a problem NASA has been working on for 20 years. A propulsion problem. How to reduce energy requirements for deep space travel." I was standing in my kitchen, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt, staring at Ben's papers scattered across the table like prophecy. I don't understand. He's just a little boy. He writes these things at my kitchen table. He doesn't even know what NASA is." "Maybe not consciously," Dr. Park said. "But his brain is processing physics at a level most of us will never reach. I need to meet him, Mrs. Torres. I need to verify this work, document it, understand it. Would you be willing to bring him to Boston?" I looked over at Ben, sitting in the living room, organizing his cars again, his world small and manageable and safe. The idea of dragging him across the country, putting him in front of strangers who'd poke and prod and ask him to perform like a circus act, it made me want to vomit. "He's autistic," I said quietly. "Change is hard for him. New places, new people. It causes him a lot of stress." "I understand. But Mrs. Torres, if his work is valid, and I believe it is, he's just solved a problem that could change space exploration. He could save NASA billions of dollars. He could help humanity reach Mars, reach beyond. Don't you think he deserves to know that? Don't you think the world deserves to see what he can do?" The world. The same world that had already rejected him once, through his mother's eyes. The same world that looked at boys like Ben and saw burdens instead of miracles. But maybe Dr. Park was right. Maybe it was time for the world to see what I'd known all along. That Ben wasn't broken. He was extraordinary. "Let me talk to him," I said. "Let me see if he's okay with it." We flew to Boston 3 weeks later. Ben handled it better than I expected. The noise-canceling headphones helped, and so did the window seat where he could watch the clouds pass beneath us like cotton cities. Dr. Park met us at her lab, a sprawling complex of glass and steel that smelled like coffee and ambition. She was younger than I'd imagined, early 40s maybe, with sharp black glasses and a handshake that felt like a promise. She knelt down to Ben's level, didn't try to force eye contact, just spoke to him like he was a colleague instead of a child. "Benjamin, my name is Evelyn. I read your papers about orbital mechanics. They're brilliant. Would you be willing to show me more?" Ben looked at her, then at me, then back at his shoes. "The numbers get loud sometimes," he said. "When they're wrong, they scream." Dr. Park nodded like this made perfect sense. "I know exactly what you mean. Would you like to show me how to make them quiet?" He thought about this for a long moment, his fingers tapping against his leg in that familiar rhythm. Then he nodded. For the next 4 hours, I watched my 8-year-old grandson work at a whiteboard with a woman who'd published papers in Nature and Physical Review letters. I watched her face change from skepticism to astonishment, to something close to reverence. I watched her colleagues gather at the window, watching, whispering, photographing the board like tourists at a cathedral. And I watched Ben, completely absorbed, completely himself, solving problems that grown men and women had declared unsolvable. When we finally took a break, Dr. Park pulled me aside, her eyes wet with tears she was trying to hide. "Mrs. Torres, he's not just solving the NASA propulsion problem. He's revolutionizing how we understand gravitational fields. If this work holds up under peer review, and I believe it will, Benjamin is going to change physics, forever." I wanted to feel pride. I wanted to feel vindicated. But all I felt was grief. Grief for all the years Rachel had missed. Grief for all the times she'd looked at this beautiful, brilliant boy and seen only difficulty. She'd thrown away a genius because he didn't fit her idea of what a son should be. And now the world was about to know his name. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd promised myself I wouldn't do. I texted Rachel. Just 2 sentences. "Ben's work is being reviewed by MIT. Thought you should know." She didn't respond. Of course she didn't. But 3,000 miles away, in a laboratory full of people who finally saw my grandson for who he truly was, Ben looked up from the whiteboard and smiled. Not at me, not at Dr. Park, at the equations, because the numbers were quiet now, and they weren't lonely anymore. If you're still with me, if this story is breaking your heart the way it broke mine, leave a comment. Tell me you're here. Tell me you see him too. Because witnesses matter. Truth matters. And this little boy deserves to have his story told. The article appeared in Scientific American 6 months after our trip to Boston. Not a small mention, not buried in the back pages, a cover story. The headline read, 8-year-old autistic savant solves 20-year NASA propulsion problem. Below it was a photo of Ben at Dr. Park's whiteboard, his small frame dwarfed by equations that seemed to glow with their own internal logic. I bought 17 copies. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof that it was real, that the world had finally seen what I'd been seeing all along. The media attention came fast and hungry. Interview requests from 60 Minutes, The Today Show, PBS NewsHour, calls from literary agents wanting to write his biography, from producers wanting to option his life rights, from universities offering full scholarships that wouldn't be relevant for another decade. Everyone wanted a piece of Ben, wanted to touch the miracle, wanted to say they'd been there when genius revealed itself in the most unexpected package. I said no to almost everything. Ben wasn't a circus act. He wasn't a feel-good story for morning television hosts to tear up over between commercials for laundry detergent. He was a little boy who still needed his pancakes cut into perfect squares, who still slept with his shoes on some nights, who still sometimes got so overwhelmed by the texture of his own clothing that he'd strip down to his underwear and cry. But I said yes to one interview, National Public Radio, because they agreed to let Ben answer questions on his own terms, in his own time, without cameras or studio audiences. Just a kind-voiced woman named Terry who spoke to him like he mattered, not like he was a curiosity. "Benjamin," she asked him, "what does it feel like when you solve a problem?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his leg. I could see him searching for words to describe something that existed beyond language. "It feels like finding something that was lost," he finally said. "Like the numbers were hiding and I helped them come home." Terry's voice was soft when she responded, "That's beautiful. Do you think you'll keep solving problems? Keep helping the numbers come home?" "Yes," Ben said, "because they need me, and I need them. They're the only things that don't leave." I had to step out of the room, had to press my hand against my mouth to keep from sobbing loud enough for the microphone to catch. Because in that one sentence, my grandson had articulated what his mother had done to him. The numbers didn't leave. But she did. The interview aired on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, it had been shared 300,000 times. By Friday, more than 2 million. People from every corner of the world were reaching out. Mathematicians, physicists, parents of autistic children, educators, advocates. They sent messages of support, donations for Ben's future education, letters telling him he was valued, seen, important. But one person stayed silent. Rachel. I knew she'd heard about it. Her friends had to have told her. Her former co-workers. Someone in her orbit had to have sent her the article, the interview, the proof that the son she'd abandoned was now being celebrated by the global scientific community. But she said nothing. Did nothing. Her silence was louder than any congratulations could have been, until it wasn't. The knock came on a Saturday afternoon in October, almost 18 months after she'd driven away from my house and changed her number. I was helping Ben organize a new set of reference books Dr. Park had sent him, advanced physics texts that he read the way other kids read Captain Underpants, when I heard it. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I looked through the peephole and my stomach dropped. Rachel. Standing on my porch in a navy suit and heels, her hair blown out professionally, her makeup perfect. And next to her, a man in an equally expensive suit, holding a leather briefcase. I opened the door slowly. Rachel. Mom. Her smile was tight, practiced. Can we come in? This is Gerald Whitmore, my attorney. We need to discuss Benjamin's future. Attorney. The word landed like a slap. His future is fine, I said, not moving from the doorway. He's happy. He's thriving. He doesn't need you disrupting that. Gerald, the lawyer, stepped forward slightly, his voice smooth and condescending. Mrs. Torres, we're not here to disrupt anything. We're here to ensure Benjamin receives the support and resources he deserves. Support that, legally, his mother is entitled to provide. Legally, I repeated, the word tasting like poison. Rachel's expression shifted, something almost apologetic flickering across her face before the mask snapped back into place. Mom, you've done an amazing job with him, really, but he's on the national stage now. He needs representation, management, someone to handle the media and the offers. He needs his mother. He needed his mother 18 months ago, I said quietly. When you dumped him on my porch like garbage. Where were you then, Rachel? Where were you when he cried himself to sleep asking why you didn't want him? Where were you when the doctors diagnosed him? When the school tried to expel him? When he spent 3 weeks refusing to eat because he thought if he got smaller you'd have room for him again? Rachel's jaw tightened. I was sick, Mom. I was depressed. I couldn't handle it. You don't understand what it was like, being a single mother to a child like him. A child like him, I interrupted. You mean brilliant. You mean kind. You mean special. Say it, Rachel. Say what you really mean. She looked away. Gerald cleared his throat. Mrs. Torres, emotions aside, Ms. Torres has legal custody of Benjamin. She has every right to... She abandoned him. My voice was shaking now, fury rising up through the grief. She left him on my doorstep with his clothes in a trash bag and changed her phone number. You want to talk about legal rights? Let's talk about abandonment. Let's talk about neglect. Gerald's smile never wavered. We prefer to frame it as a temporary custodial arrangement during a period of mental health crisis. Ms. Torres was struggling, made the difficult decision to place Benjamin with a family member who could better meet his needs, and is now, having recovered, ready to resume her parental responsibilities. The corporate language made me want to scream, but Rachel's expression stopped me, because behind the makeup and the suit and the lawyer standing beside her like a shield, I saw it. Shame. She knew what she'd done. She knew what she was. She just didn't care enough to be different. Get off my porch, I said. Mom, get off my porch. Rachel opened her mouth, closed it. Gerald placed a hand on her arm. We'll be in touch, Mrs. Torres. This isn't over. They walked back to the black Mercedes parked in my driveway, the lawyer's briefcase swinging like a pendulum, counting down the seconds until my world exploded. I closed the door and locked it, then stood there, my forehead pressed against the wood, my breath coming in short gasps. Behind me, Ben's small voice. Grandma? Was that my mom? I turned. He was standing in the hallway, his physics textbook still in his hands, his face expressionless, but his fingers moving in rapid, anxious patterns. Yes, baby. That was your mom. Is she taking me away? The question broke me, shattered me into pieces I didn't know how to put back together. No, I said, walking to him, kneeling down, taking his face in my hands. No, Ben. I won't let that happen. I promise. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Promises don't matter when lawyers get involved. Love doesn't matter when custody laws favor biological parents. What I wanted, what Ben needed, none of it mattered if Rachel had decided to come back. Not because she loved him, but because he was worth something now. And I was about to find out just how much a genius is worth when his mother comes back to claim him. Stay with me. This is where it gets ugly. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me, have you ever had to protect someone from the person who was supposed to love them most? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not fighting this alone. The certified letter arrived 3 days after Rachel showed up with her lawyer. It was addressed to Benjamin Torres, C.O. Karen Torres. The envelope thick and official with the NASA logo embossed in the corner. My hands were shaking when I signed for it. Ben was at school, his special school, the one where teachers understood that sometimes he needed to work standing up, or in complete silence, or while walking in circles. The school I'd spent 6 months fighting to get him into, proving to the district that he needed accommodations, not corrections. I opened the letter at my kitchen table, the same table where Ben had first written the equations that were now changing everything. Dear Benjamin, on behalf of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, I am honored to inform you that your solution to the variable specific impulse magnetoplasma rocket propulsion problem has been validated by our research team. Your approach to reducing energy consumption in deep space travel represents a breakthrough that will advance our mission to Mars and beyond. We would like to invite you to our headquarters in Washington, D.C., to meet with our team and discuss potential collaboration opportunities. We are also establishing an educational fund in your name to support your continued studies in mathematics and physics. Benjamin, you have accomplished something extraordinary. We look forward to watching you change the future. Sincerely, Administrator Sarah Mitchum, NASA Headquarters. I read it 3 times. Then I cried, ugly, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief, somewhere that had been holding its breath for 18 months, waiting for the world to validate what I'd always known. My grandson was extraordinary, but the joy was complicated, tangled up with fear, because this letter wasn't just validation. It was ammunition. The kind Rachel's lawyer could use to argue that Ben needed his real mother, someone who could navigate the complexities of media attention and financial opportunities, someone who understood contracts and publicity and intellectual property rights, someone who wasn't a 63-year-old grandmother who still bought store-brand cereal and drove a 12-year-old Honda. I photographed the letter and sent it to Tom, who immediately called his friend at Case Western, who called another friend who practiced family law. By the time Ben came home from school, stimming happily about a pattern he'd discovered in prime numbers, I had a referral to 3 attorneys and a pit in my stomach that felt like I'd swallowed stones. That night, after Ben was asleep, I sat in my bedroom and did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not to God exactly. My relationship with faith had always been complicated, but to the universe, to whatever force decides which children get thrown away and which get lifted up. Please, I whispered into the dark. Please don't let her take him. Please. The universe didn't answer. It never does. But my phone buzzed with a text message, and when I looked down, my blood went cold. It was from Rachel. We need to talk. Not with lawyers. Just us. Tomorrow. Please, Mom. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, block her number, pretend she didn't exist the way she'd pretended Ben didn't exist. But another part, the part that remembered the little girl she used to be before life hardened her, before single motherhood and poverty and exhaustion turned her into someone I didn't recognize. That part felt something like hope. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done, what she'd lost. Maybe this was her moment of clarity. I texted back, 10 a.m., the coffee shop on Maple, come alone. She arrived 15 minutes early. I watched her through the window, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. She'd dressed down, jeans and a sweater instead of the power suit, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger. She looked like my daughter again. I almost turned around and left, but I didn't. I walked in, ordered a black coffee I didn't want, and sat down across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "What do you want, Rachel?" She flinched at my tone but didn't back down. "I want to explain. I want you to understand." "Understand what? That you gave up on your son because he was too difficult? That you erased him from your life like a mistake you could undo? Tell me, Rachel, what part of that am I supposed to understand?" Tears welled up in her eyes, real ones, not the performative kind she'd cried in high school when boys didn't call back. "I was drowning, Mom. Every single day felt like drowning. The meltdowns, the school meetings, the looks from other parents, the constant feeling that I was failing him. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't be what he needed. So you ran." "So I survived," she shot back. "I did what I had to do to not completely fall apart. And yes, I know how that sounds. I know what it makes me. But I'm here now. I'm better now. I want to try again." I laughed, a bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. "You want to try again? Now? Now that he's on magazine covers? Now that NASA wants to meet him? Now that there's money involved, opportunities, fame? Where was this revelation 18 months ago, Rachel? Where was it when he was just a difficult kid nobody wanted to deal with? That's not fair." "Fair?" My voice was rising now, and people were starting to stare, but I didn't care. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that Ben still asks me sometimes if you stopped loving him because he was bad? Is it fair that he sleeps with his shoes on because he's afraid of being moved again? Is it fair that you get to walk back into his life now that he's worth something?" Rachel was crying fully now, her shoulders shaking. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know that. But he's my son, Mom. He's my son, and I made a mistake. He was never your mistake," I said softly, and the shift in my tone seemed to hurt her more than the yelling had. "He was your miracle, and you threw him away." We sat in silence for a long time, the coffee shop noise washing around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the clink of cups against saucers. Rachel wiped her eyes with a napkin, smearing her mascara. "I'm not going to fight you," she finally said. "I'm not going to take you to court. I'm calling off Gerald." I looked at her, searching her face for the lie. "Why?" "Because you're right. Because I don't deserve him. And because—" She paused, her voice breaking. "Because he's better off with you. I can see that now. I needed you to know I'm sorry. I needed you to know I see what I did. What I lost." Something in my chest loosened, just slightly. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. But maybe something like understanding. Because motherhood is impossible, even under the best circumstances. And Rachel had been alone, overwhelmed, unsupported. That didn't excuse what she did, but maybe it explained it. "If you want to be part of his life," I said carefully, "if you want to earn back even the smallest piece of his trust, it has to be on his terms. No lawyers, no publicity, no using his success to make yourself feel better about leaving. Just quiet, consistent presence." "Can you do that?" She nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "I can try." "Trying isn't enough, Rachel. He deserves certainty." "Then I'll be certain," she said. "I promise." I finished my coffee, stood up, and looked down at my daughter, this complicated, broken woman who'd given me the greatest gift of my life by giving him up. "We'll see," I said. And I walked out, leaving her there with her cold coffee, and her tears, and her too late regrets. That night, I told Ben his mother wanted to visit sometimes. He didn't react, just kept arranging his cars, his face neutral. "Okay," he finally said. "Will you be here too?" "Always," I promised. "I'll always be here." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his cars. The conversation was over for him, already filed away in whatever organizational system his brain used to make sense of a world that rarely made sense. But for me, it was just beginning. Because Rachel would come back, I knew that now. She'd show up with apologies and promises in the face of someone who wanted to do better. And I'd have to decide whether to believe her, or whether to keep protecting Ben from the one person who should have protected him first. If you've ever had to decide whether to trust someone who broke you, you know how impossible this feels. Drop a comment. Tell me what you'd do. Because I still don't know if I made the right choice. Rachel started coming by every Sunday. Always at 2 p.m., always with something in her hands. A book about space, a new set of colored pencils, a puzzle with 3,000 pieces that Ben would solve in an afternoon. She'd sit in my living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a guest who wasn't sure she was welcome, and try to make conversation with a son who barely remembered her. "How was school this week, Ben?" "Fine." "Did you learn anything interesting?" "Orbital decay patterns in binary star systems." "Oh, that's great." The conversations were stilted, awkward, like two strangers forced together on a long flight. Ben answered her questions with mechanical politeness, the same flat tone he used with the grocery store clerk or the mailman. He didn't ask her anything, didn't volunteer information, didn't look at her unless she specifically positioned herself in his line of sight. And Rachel, to her credit, kept showing up. Week after week, even when it was clear Ben had no interest in rebuilding what she'd destroyed. She sat through his long silences, his hand flapping, his sudden exits when the conversation became too much. She learned not to touch him without warning, not to use strong perfume, not to expect eye contact or hugs or any of the normal markers of mother-son affection. She was learning who he was. 2 years too late. I watched from the kitchen, pretending to do dishes or fold laundry, but really just monitoring, ready to intervene the second Ben showed signs of distress. But he never did. He just tolerated her. Like he tolerated the fluorescent lights at school or the sound of the vacuum cleaner. Necessary discomforts he'd learned to endure. On the 6th Sunday, Rachel brought something different. Not a gift for Ben, but an envelope for me. She handed it to me in the kitchen while Ben was setting up his latest puzzle. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a check, $50,000 made out to me. My hands went numb. "Rachel, I can't. It's not from me," she said quickly. "Well, it is, but it's from the settlement. Remember 6 years ago when I was in that car accident? The other driver's insurance finally paid out. This is half of it. I want you to have it. For Ben. For his education, his therapy, whatever he needs." I stared at the check, at the number that could change everything. Could pay off my mortgage, could hire the best tutors, could secure Ben's future in ways my Social Security checks never could. "Why now?" I asked. Rachel's eyes were wet again. They were always wet these days, like she'd sprung a leak she couldn't fix. "Because I can't give him back the time I took. I can't undo what I did. But I can do this. Please, Mom. Let me do this one thing right." I wanted to refuse it. Wanted to throw it back at her and tell her that money couldn't buy absolution, couldn't erase 18 months of abandonment. But I looked through the doorway at Ben, at his secondhand clothes and his worn-out shoes, at the life I was giving him that was full of love, but fundamentally limited by my fixed income and aging body. "For Ben," I said quietly. "Not for you. For Ben," she agreed. I deposited the check that Monday. Set up a trust account that only I could access, with Ben as the sole beneficiary. Used some of it to hire a financial advisor who specialized in families with special needs children. Someone who could help me plan for Ben's future in case something happened to me. Because that was my nightmare. The thought of leaving him alone, vulnerable, with no one to protect him from a world that didn't understand how precious he was. The NASA trip was scheduled for mid-November. They wanted Ben to tour the facilities, meet the team working on the propulsion system, participate in a small press conference where they'd publicly acknowledge his contribution. Dr. Park flew in from Boston to accompany us, and to my surprise, Rachel asked if she could come too. "I won't get in the way," she promised. "I just want to see him be recognized. I want to see what you've been telling me about." I almost said no. But Ben, in his matter-of-fact way, shrugged and said, "She can come if she wants. It doesn't matter." It doesn't matter. Those 3 words were somehow more devastating than anger would have been, because they meant Rachel had become irrelevant to him, a peripheral character in his story, instead of the central figure she should have been. We flew to DC on a Tuesday morning. Me, Ben, Dr. Park, and Rachel, who sat 1 row behind us and spent the entire flight staring out the window. Ben wore his noise-canceling headphones and read a textbook on quantum mechanics, occasionally pointing out passages to Dr. Park, who'd nod and scribble notes in the margins of her own copy. Rachel watched them with an expression I couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe. Or regret. Or just the slow, painful realization of what she'd given up. NASA headquarters was stunning. All glass and steel and American flags, filled with people who moved with the purpose of those who believed they were changing the future. We were met by a team of scientists and PR representatives, all of whom treated Ben like a dignified colleague rather than a child, which he appreciated visibly. Administrator Mitchum was a tall woman with silver hair and a handshake like a promise kept. She knelt down to Ben's level. Everyone who understood him knew to do this, and spoke directly to him. "Benjamin, what you've done is going to help us reach Mars. Do you understand that? You've made it possible for human beings to travel farther into space than we've ever gone before." Ben considered this, his fingers tapping against his leg. "Will they take measurements of the solar wind and radiation exposure during transit? Because the equations predict certain fluctuations that need to be verified." Administrator Mitchum smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "We'll take all the measurements you want. In fact, we'd like you to help us design some of the experiments. Would you be interested in that?" Ben's eyes lit up, not with childish excitement, but with the kind of focused intensity that meant his brain was already racing ahead, solving problems that didn't exist yet. "Yes, I'd like that very much. The press conference was small, as promised. Just a handful of reporters from the Washington Post, Science Magazine, and NPR. Ben sat at a table that was too big for him, his feet not quite reaching the floor, flanked by Administrator Mitchum and Dr. Park. Rachel and I sat in the back row, observers to our own son's triumph. The questions were gentle, respectful. How did you come up with the solution? What inspired you? What do you want to be when you grow up? Ben answered each one in his characteristic way. Direct, honest, unburdened by false modesty or social performance. I saw the problem, and I understood it wasn't actually about propulsion. It was about energy distribution. The equation was unhappy. I made it happy. The reporters laughed, charmed. One of them, a young woman from Science Magazine, asked, "Benjamin, who's been your biggest inspiration? Who helped you get here?" Ben didn't hesitate. "My grandma. She lets me work at her kitchen table, and she cuts my pancakes into squares." The room went quiet. Then Administrator Mitchum started clapping, and everyone joined in, and I sat there in the back row with tears streaming down my face while my grandson was applauded by people who finally saw what I'd been seeing all along. I glanced at Rachel. She was crying too, but differently. Her shoulders were shaking, her hand pressed against her mouth like she was trying to hold something in. Grief, maybe, or shame, or the horrible realization that when her son was asked who helped him become extraordinary, he hadn't said her name. He'd said mine. After the press conference, we had dinner at a restaurant near the Capitol. Ben ordered chicken tenders, the only restaurant food he'd reliably eat, and spent most of the meal folding and refolding his napkin into increasingly complex geometric shapes. Rachel tried to engage him, asking about his favorite part of the day, but he just shrugged. "It was fine," he said. "Can we go back to Grandma's house tomorrow? I have a new equation I want to work on." "Of course, sweetheart," I said. Rachel put down her fork. "Ben, I'm really proud of you. I hope you know that." Ben looked at her for the first time all evening. Really looked at her, and for a moment I thought maybe something would shift. Some connection would spark. But then he just said, "Okay," and went back to his napkin. Rachel excused herself and went to the bathroom. She was gone for 15 minutes. When she came back, her eyes were red and swollen, and she didn't try to talk to Ben again for the rest of the meal. That night, in our hotel room, Rachel had gotten her own room down the hall. Ben got ready for bed with his usual precision. Pajamas laid out in order. Teeth brushed for exactly 2 minutes. Socks on, because he still slept with his shoes nearby just in case. As I was tucking him in, he said something that made my heart stop. "Grandma, if my mom wants to be my mom again, does that mean you won't be my grandma anymore?" I sat down on the edge of his bed, carefully, slowly, giving him time to adjust to the shift in space. "No, baby. I'll always be your grandma. Always. Nothing can change that." "Good," he said. "Because I don't remember having a mom, but I remember having you." I kissed his forehead, one of the few physical affections he tolerated, and turned out the light. Then I went into the bathroom, turned on the shower to cover the sound, and sobbed until I thought I'd break. Because Ben was right. He didn't remember having a mom. He remembered being abandoned by one. And all of Rachel's Sunday visits, all her tears and apologies and checks for $50,000, none of it could undo that fundamental truth. She'd taught him that mothers leave, and I'd taught him that grandmas stay. We flew home the next day. Rachel sat with us this time, and at one point during the flight, she reached across the aisle and touched my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being what I couldn't be." I didn't answer. I just squeezed her hand once, briefly, and then let go. Because forgiveness is complicated. And family is even more complicated. And sometimes the best we can do is show up, keep trying, and hope that eventually, the people we've hurt will see that we're different than we were. But hoping isn't the same as knowing. And Rachel still had years of Sundays ahead of her before she'd earn the right to be called mom again. If she ever did. Tell me in the comments, can abandonment ever be forgiven? Can trust be rebuilt after it's been shattered? Because I'm still figuring it out, and I could use your wisdom. Subscribe if this story is speaking to you, because it's about to get even more complicated. And I need to know you're still here with me. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in January, 3 months after the NASA press conference. I was making breakfast. Square pancakes, always square. When my phone rang with a California number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Torres? This is Marcus Chen from Vertex Innovations. We're a technology company based in Palo Alto. Do you have a moment to discuss an opportunity regarding Benjamin? I turned off the stove. What kind of opportunity? We'd like to offer Benjamin a position as a consultant. We're developing AI systems for space exploration and autonomous navigation, and we believe his unique approach to problem-solving could be invaluable. The compensation would be substantial. We're talking about $1 million annual retainer, plus equity in the company. I sat down. Hard. He's 8 years old. We understand that. We'd work around his school schedule, provide whatever accommodations he needs, arrange for tutors and therapists to travel with him. We'd essentially build our research schedule around his needs and capabilities. Mrs. Torres, Benjamin is once-in-a-generation brilliant. Companies like ours spend billions trying to solve the problems he solves at your kitchen table. We want to learn from him, and we're willing to invest significantly in his future. $1 million a year. The number bounced around my brain like a rubber ball. That was more money than I'd earned in my entire life. That was college funds and medical care, and a house without a mortgage and security for Ben's future that extended decades beyond my own life expectancy. That was also an 8-year-old child being asked to work for a corporation, to produce on demand, to turn his gift into a commodity. I need to think about it, I said. Of course. I'll email you the formal proposal. But Mrs. Torres, please consider this carefully. Benjamin's abilities are extraordinary, and they deserve to be cultivated in an environment with unlimited resources. We can give him things you can't: cutting-edge technology, collaboration with the world's leading scientists, opportunities that simply don't exist outside Silicon Valley. He was right. I knew he was right. My kitchen table and store-brand notebooks couldn't compete with whatever Vertex Innovations could offer. But my kitchen table came with something they couldn't provide: unconditional love with no strings attached, no deliverables, no expectations beyond being himself. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called the one person I knew would understand the weight of this decision: Dr. Park. She answered on the second ring. Karen, is everything okay? I told her about the offer. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. What does your gut tell you? She finally asked. My gut says a child shouldn't have a job. My gut says Ben needs to be a kid, not a consultant. But my brain says I'm being selfish, that I'm limiting him because I'm afraid of losing him. Are you afraid of losing him? Or are you afraid of him being used? The question hit me like cold water. Both. Then that's your answer, Dr. Park said gently. Karen, I've worked with child prodigies before. The ones who thrive are the ones who get to develop at their own pace, following their curiosity rather than someone else's agenda. The ones who burn out are the ones who become products, who spend their childhood meeting other people's expectations. Ben is special, but he's also fragile. The world will always want more from him than he can healthily give. Your job is to protect him from that, even if it means saying no to $1 million. Especially then. I hung up and found Ben in the living room, working on a new equation, his pencil moving across the paper with that familiar focused intensity. He looked so small, so vulnerable, even as his brain was processing concepts most adults would never understand. Ben, honey, can we talk for a minute? He finished the line he was writing and looked up. Okay. I sat down next to him, careful to leave space between us. A company called and offered you a job. They want you to help them solve problems. They'd pay you a lot of money, Ben considered this. Would I still live here? With you? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe you'd have to travel a lot. Would I still go to school with Mr. Patterson? His favorite math teacher, the one who let him work standing at the back of the classroom when sitting, became unbearable. Probably not. They said they'd get you tutors. Ben's fingers started tapping against his leg, faster than usual. A sign of stress. I don't want tutors. I want Mr. Patterson. And I want to sleep in my room. And I want your pancakes. My throat tightened. Then we'll tell them no thank you. Okay, Ben said, and went back to his equation like we'd just discussed what to have for dinner. Not a life-changing opportunity that most people would kill for. But that was Ben. His priorities were simple, even if his brain wasn't. He wanted routine and stability, and square pancakes. The rest was just noise. I called Marcus Chen back that afternoon and declined the offer. He tried to negotiate, maybe just summer consulting, maybe remote work, maybe we could start small and build up. But I held firm. Ben wasn't for sale. Not for $1 million, not for 10 million, not for all the equity in Silicon Valley. I thought that would be the end of it. But 3 days later, Rachel showed up unannounced, not on Sunday, and she wasn't alone. Gerald Whitmore, her lawyer, was with her again. And this time he wasn't here for a polite conversation. They stood on my porch, and Rachel wouldn't meet my eyes. We need to discuss Benjamin's opportunities, Gerald said, his voice that same smooth condescension I'd learned to hate. Ms. Torres has been made aware of the Vertex Innovations offer, and she believes it would be in Benjamin's best interest to accept it. My blood went cold. How did you? We have friends in common with the Vertex team, Gerald said, not quite smiling. Ms. Torres, as Benjamin's biological mother and legal guardian, has the right to make decisions about his professional opportunities. We're prepared to file for full custody if you continue to stand in the way of his development. I looked at Rachel, really looked at her. Is this what you want? You want to sell your son to a tech company? I want him to have every opportunity, Rachel said quietly. I want him to have resources and support and a future that isn't limited by... She stopped. By me, I finished. Say it, Rachel. Limited by his grandmother who lives on Social Security and drives a 12-year-old car. It's not about that. It's exactly about that. I stepped forward, and Gerald instinctively moved between us like I was the threat. You couldn't handle him when he was difficult, when he needed you, when there was no money or glory attached. You threw him away. And now that he's worth something, now that there are companies offering millions of dollars, suddenly you're ready to be his mother? Suddenly you know what's best for him? I made a mistake, Rachel said, and now she was crying, but I was too angry to care. I know I did, but I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to give him what he deserves. He deserves a home, I said. He deserves stability. He deserves people who love him unconditionally, not corporations who see him as a profit center. You want to know what Ben said when I told him about the offer? He said he wanted to stay here. He wanted his teacher and his room and my pancakes. Not tutors, not Silicon Valley, not $1 million consulting contract. He wanted home. And you want to take that away from him for money. Gerald cleared his throat. Mrs. Torres, I understand this is emotional, but get out of my house. We're not in your house. Get off my property. Both of you. Rachel was sobbing now, her hands over her face. Gerald pulled out a business card and tried to hand it to me. I didn't take it. We'll be filing a motion next week, he said. I suggest you retain counsel. They walked back to the Mercedes. I stood on the porch, shaking with rage and fear, watching them drive away. Then I went inside, locked the door, and called Tom. I need a lawyer, I said when he answered. A good one. Rachel's trying to take Ben. I'll make some calls. Karen, it's going to be okay. No, I interrupted. No, it's not. Because she's his mother, and the courts favor biological parents, and she has money for lawyers, And I don't. It's not going to be okay, Tom. I'm going to lose him. But even as I said it, I knew I'd fight. I'd sell my house if I had to, spend every penny of that $50,000 check Rachel had given me. The irony wasn't lost on me. And fight with everything I had. Because Ben wasn't a business opportunity. He wasn't a genius to be monetized or a prodigy to be paraded around Silicon Valley boardrooms. He was my grandson. He was a little boy who liked his pancakes cut into squares, and his cars lined up by color, and his grandma nearby when the world got too loud. And I'd be damned if I'd let him be turned into a product. That night, after Ben was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table. His table, where he'd solved the unsolvable. And I wrote down everything. Every Sunday Rachel had visited, every conversation we'd had, every moment that proved she'd been absent and I'd been present, every piece of evidence that Ben was thriving with me, that he was loved and supported and safe. I was building a case, not just legally but morally. A case that sometimes the best parent isn't the one who gave birth, but the one who showed up, the one who stayed. And I was praying, to God, to the universe, to whatever forces decide the fates of children and grandmothers, that it would be enough. If you're still with me, if you're invested in Ben's story, in our fight, leave me a comment. Tell me you see us. Tell me we're not alone. Because the battle is just beginning, and I need to know there are witnesses. Hit subscribe, because what happens next is going to break your heart and put it back together. And I need you here for all of it. The family court building smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. I'd been there 3 times before. Twice for preliminary hearings, once for a mediation that went nowhere. And each time I walked through those doors, I felt a little more of myself erode. Today was different. Today was the custody hearing. The final one. The one where a judge would decide if Ben stayed with me or went back to the mother who'd abandoned him. My lawyer was a woman named Patricia Vega, mid-50s, with steel gray hair and a reputation for winning impossible cases. Tom had called in every favor he had to get her to take us on at a reduced rate, and even then, I'd spent $35,000 of Rachel's money fighting her for custody of her own son. The irony kept me awake at night. Ben didn't come to court. Patricia had insisted. Said it was better if he didn't see the ugliness. Didn't watch his mother and grandmother dissect his life in front of a stranger in a black robe. He was at school, probably solving equations during recess while other kids played kickball, unaware that his entire future was being decided in a windowless room that smelled like broken families. Rachel sat across the aisle with Gerald Whitmore and another lawyer, a woman named Sandra Chen who specialized in child advocacy. They'd brought an arsenal. Expert witnesses, psychological evaluations, reports from educators and therapists. Rachel had suddenly started consulting once the custody fight began. I had Patricia, Dr. Park via video call, Ben's school teachers, and the truth. I hoped it would be enough. Judge Maria Hendricks entered at precisely 9 a.m. She was younger than I expected. Early 50s, black, with an expression that gave away nothing. She'd read all the briefs, all the motions, all the evidence both sides had submitted. She knew Ben's story. She knew mine. She knew Rachel's. Now she had to decide which one mattered most. Gerald went first. He painted Rachel as a young, single mother overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control, who'd made the difficult decision to temporarily place Ben with a family member during a mental health crisis, and who was now stable, employed, and ready to provide the resources her son needed and deserved. "Your Honor," Gerald said, his voice smooth as oil, "Ms. Torres deeply regrets the manner in which she handled the situation 18 months ago. She was suffering from severe postpartum depression. Ben was 7 when she left him," Patricia interrupted. "Postpartum depression doesn't last 7 years. Clinical depression, then," Gerald corrected smoothly. "The point is, Ms. Torres was unwell, sought treatment, and is now in a position to provide for her son in ways that, frankly, Mrs. Karen Torres cannot. Benjamin is a prodigy." He requires specialized education, access to cutting-edge resources, opportunities to develop his extraordinary gifts. Ms. Torres can provide those things. Mrs. Torres, despite her love for the child, simply cannot. He was right, and that's what made it hurt. I couldn't give Ben what $1 million consulting contract could give him. I couldn't provide private tutors or trips to NASA or collaboration with MIT professors. All I could give him was stability and love and square pancakes. All I could give him was home. Patricia stood. She was shorter than Gerald, but somehow took up more space, her presence filling the courtroom with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need volume. Your Honor, this case isn't about resources. It's about abandonment. Ms. Rachel Torres didn't place Benjamin with a family member during a crisis. She dropped him on his grandmother's porch with his belongings in a trash bag, changed her phone number, and disappeared from his life for 18 months. No calls, no visits, no child support. When Benjamin was diagnosed, when he struggled in school, when he cried himself to sleep, asking why his mother didn't want him, where was Ms. Torres? Gerald started to stand, but Judge Hendricks waved him down. Patricia continued. Benjamin Torres is thriving with his grandmother. His teachers report that he's happy, engaged, making progress socially as well as academically. Yes, he's a prodigy. Yes, he has extraordinary gifts. But he's also an 8-year-old autistic child who needs routine, stability, and unconditional love. Things he has with Mrs. Karen Torres. Things he didn't have with his mother. Ms. Torres was ill? Gerald began. Ms. Torres was absent. Patricia cut him off. And now, 18 months later, only after Benjamin's achievements became public, only after companies started offering money, she suddenly wants custody. This isn't about Benjamin's best interest. This is about his financial potential. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Rachel was crying quietly, her hands folded in her lap. I wanted to feel sorry for her. Part of me still did, but a bigger part of me was just terrified. Judge Hendricks looked at both lawyers. I'd like to hear from some witnesses. Let's start with Dr. Evelyn Park. Dr. Park appeared on the video screen, calling in from MIT. She testified about Ben's extraordinary abilities, but more importantly, about his emotional state. When I first met Benjamin, she said, he was anxious, uncertain, clearly traumatized by his mother's abandonment. Over the past 18 months, I've watched him blossom. He's more confident, more willing to engage, happier. That transformation is directly attributable to the stable, loving environment Mrs. Torres has provided. Benjamin needs that stability. Uprooting him now, especially to satisfy corporate interests, would be devastating. Do you have concerns about Ms. Rachel Torres's ability to parent Benjamin? Judge Hendricks asked. Dr. Park didn't hesitate. I have concerns about her motivations. In all my interactions with Benjamin over the past 1.5 years, he's never mentioned his mother. Not once. He talks about his grandmother constantly. When I asked him who helped him become who he is, he said, Grandma lets me work at her kitchen table. That's what matters to him. Not resources, not opportunities. His grandmother's kitchen table. Next came Ben's teachers, who testified that he was doing well in school, that he had friends, that he was learning to navigate his autism with support and patience. They testified that stability was crucial for children like Ben, that disrupting his routine could trigger regression. Then Rachel's witnesses took the stand. A therapist she'd been seeing for 6 months who testified that she was much improved and ready to parent. An educational consultant who argued that Ben needed specialized resources only significant financial investment could provide. A child psychologist who suggested that mother-child bonding was crucial for long-term development. But none of them had met Ben. None of them could speak to what he needed because none of them had bothered to ask him. Finally, Judge Hendricks called a recess. Patricia, Tom, and I sat in a small conference room drinking bad coffee and waiting for our fate to be decided. How do you think it went? I asked Patricia. She didn't sugarcoat it. It's close. Legally, biological parents have significant rights. Rachel's lawyers made a strong case that she's rehabilitated, that she can provide more resources. But we made an equally strong case about abandonment and Ben's current well-being. It could go either way. My hands were shaking. If she wins, we appeal. But Karen, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that... No, I interrupted. I can't. I can't prepare for losing him. He's my whole world. Patricia's expression softened. I know. We're going to fight as hard as we can. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Hendricks was already seated, a file open in front of her. She looked tired, like she'd spent the recess carrying the weight of a decision that would change multiple lives. I've reviewed all the testimony, all the evidence, all the expert opinions, she began. This is a difficult case because both parties clearly care about Benjamin. Mrs. Karen Torres has provided exemplary care for the past 18 months. Benjamin is thriving academically, socially, and emotionally in her care. Ms. Rachel Torres has demonstrated remorse for her past actions and appears committed to building a relationship with her son. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. However, Judge Hendricks continued, this court cannot ignore the fundamental fact of abandonment. Ms. Torres didn't arrange temporary custody through legal channels. She didn't seek support or help. She dropped her son off and disappeared. For 18 months. That's not a temporary placement during crisis. That's abandonment. Rachel was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Furthermore, I'm troubled by the timing of Ms. Torres's renewed interest in custody. Benjamin's abilities became public approximately 3 months ago. Ms. Torres filed for custody 2 weeks later. While I don't doubt she loves her son, I question whether this action is truly in Benjamin's best interest, or whether other factors are motivating it. I held my breath. Therefore, I'm awarding full physical and legal custody to Mrs. Karen Torres. The words didn't register at first. Then Patricia was squeezing my hand. Tom was crying beside me. And across the aisle, Rachel was collapsed against her lawyer, wailing like something had been torn out of her. However, Judge Hendricks said, and everyone went quiet again, I'm ordering supervised visitation for Ms. Rachel Torres. 2 hours every Sunday, supervised by a court-appointed monitor, with the possibility of expanded visitation if she demonstrates consistent, appropriate parenting over the next year. This is Benjamin's mother. He deserves the opportunity to know her, and she deserves the chance to rebuild that relationship. But it will be on his terms, at his pace, with his well-being as the priority. She banged her gavel. Custody is granted to Mrs. Karen Torres. Next case. And just like that, it was over. I sat there numb as people filed out of the courtroom. Rachel walked past me, still crying, and for just a moment our eyes met. She looked broken, destroyed, and despite everything, despite all the pain she'd caused, I felt sorry for her, but not sorry enough to change my mind. Not sorry enough to give him back. Patricia drove me home. I don't remember the drive, don't remember walking into the house, don't remember anything until I was standing in Ben's doorway watching him work at his desk, his pencil moving across paper, completely absorbed. Ben, I said softly. He looked up. Hi, Grandma. How was your day? Good, sweetheart. Really good. You're staying here, with me. Forever. He nodded, like this confirmed something he'd already known. Good. I like it here. Then he went back to his equations, and I stood there crying quiet tears of relief and grief and victory and loss all tangled together. Because I'd won. But Rachel had lost. And Ben, in his own way, had lost a mother twice. Once when she left, and again when the courts confirmed she'd never really been his mother at all. That night, I called Dr. Park. We won, I told her. I know, she said. Karen, you did the right thing. You fought for him. You saved him. I don't feel like I saved anyone, I admitted. I just feel tired. That's what love looks like sometimes, she said gently. Exhaustion. But you showed up. You fought. You won. That matters. Maybe it did. Maybe winning mattered. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to Ben's soft breathing through the baby monitor I still kept in his room, all I could think about was how much it had cost, not in lawyer fees or court dates, but in broken relationships and shattered families, and a little boy who'd learned that the word mother was complicated. But grandmother? That word was simple. That word meant safety and square pancakes and someone who stays. And I was going to spend the rest of my life making sure he never doubted it. Subscribe if you're still here. Comment if you've been fighting battles nobody sees. Tell me your city, your story, your truth. Because we all need witnesses. We all need someone to say, I see you fighting, and you're not alone. 9 months after the custody hearing, on a Thursday morning in early September, I was in the garden pulling weeds when my phone rang. The number had an unusual country code, something in the +40 range, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me wipe the dirt off my hands and pick up. Hello? Mrs. Karen Torres? The voice was male, accented, Swedish maybe, formal and slightly breathless. Yes? My name is Dr. Lars Bergström. I'm calling from the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Is this a good time? I sat down on the porch steps. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. That was the Nobel Prize people. Yes, I said, my voice strange in my own ears. This is fine. Mrs. Torres, I'm calling to inform you that Benjamin Torres has been awarded the Crafoord Prize in Mathematics. It's one of the most prestigious awards in the field, given to recognize fundamental advancements. Benjamin's work on gravitational field equations and their application to space propulsion represents a paradigm shift in theoretical physics. The committee was unanimous. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He's 9 years old. Yes, Dr. Bergström said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. He's also the youngest recipient in the prize's history. The award ceremony will be in Stockholm in May. We'll cover all travel expenses for Benjamin and 2 guardians. Mrs. Torres, your grandson has accomplished something extraordinary. The world needs to recognize that. After the call, I sat on the porch for a long time, my phone in my lap, tears running down my face. Not sad tears. Not happy tears exactly. Something more complicated, pride and grief and overwhelming gratitude all mixed together. Ben was going to receive one of the most prestigious awards in science, at 9 years old, and his mother was going to hear about it on the news, like everyone else. I found Ben in his room, building an elaborate structure out of magnetic tiles. Something about demonstrating spatial geometry principles, though to me, it just looked like a castle. He was humming softly, that tuneless sound he made when he was content. Ben, honey, I need to tell you something. He didn't look up from his tiles. Okay, you won an award. A really, really important award. It's called the Crafoord Prize, and it's for your math work. We're going to go to Sweden in May for the ceremony. Ben paused, his hands hovering over the tiles. Will there be a lot of people? Probably, yes. Will they want me to talk? Maybe a little. He considered this, his fingers tapping against his leg. Will you be there, the whole time? The whole time, I promised. I won't leave your side. Okay, he said, and went back to his tiles like I'd just told him we were having chicken for dinner instead of that. He'd won one of the world's most prestigious scientific awards. That was Ben. To him, the tiles in his hand were more real, more important, than accolades from people he'd never met. The world could call him a genius, could put him on magazine covers and fly him to Sweden, but what mattered to him was whether his grandmother would be there, whether the routine would hold, whether he'd still be safe. The news broke the next day. 9-year-old autistic savant wins Crafoord Prize. The headlines were everywhere. CNN, BBC, the New York Times. Our phone didn't stop ringing. Interview requests, congratulations from strangers, messages from people claiming to be old friends who I'd never heard of. And then, inevitably, Rachel called. I almost didn't answer, but something, maybe the last shred of my belief that she could be better, maybe just exhaustion, made me pick up. Mom. Her voice was small, fragile. I saw the news, about the prize. Yes. Silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her searching for words that wouldn't sound hollow. I'm proud of him, she finally said. You should tell him that, during your next supervised visit. I know I don't have the right to ask, but... Her voice cracked. Can I come to Stockholm? I won't interfere. I won't cause problems. I want to be there. Please, Mom. Let me see him receive this. Let me be there for one important moment. Every instinct screamed at me to say no. To protect Ben from the woman who'd hurt him, from the mother who only showed up when the lights were bright and the cameras were rolling. But another part of me, the part that remembered the little girl she used to be, the part that still hoped people could change, that part hesitated. I'll ask him, I said. If he says yes, you can come. But Rachel, if he says no, then I won't come, she said quickly. It's his choice. It should always have been his choice. That Sunday, during her supervised visit, she'd been consistent. I had to give her that, showing up every week for 9 months without fail. I watched her sit with Ben at the kitchen table while he explained a new equation he was working on. She didn't understand it, I could tell, but she listened. Really listened. Nodded in the right places. Asked questions that weren't about her but about him. Maybe she was learning. Maybe 18 months of absence and a custody loss had finally taught her what should have been instinctual. That being a mother meant showing up, even when it was hard, even when you didn't get anything in return. When the monitor, a kind woman named Susan, stepped out to take a phone call, I approached the table. Ben, your mom wants to know if she can come to Sweden for the award ceremony. It's your choice, sweetheart, whatever you want. Ben looked at Rachel, really looked at her, making eye contact for maybe the 3rd time in 9 months. And I saw something pass between them. Not forgiveness exactly. Not reconciliation. But maybe the beginning of something. A recognition that she was trying. Okay, he said. She can come, but she has to sit with Grandma. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I will. Thank you, Ben. Thank you. He nodded and went back to his equation, the conversation already filed away in whatever part of his brain managed social interactions. But Rachel sat there for a long moment, staring at her son, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before. Humility. The recognition that she'd lost the right to be his mother. But maybe, she could earn the privilege of being in his life. The months between September and May passed in a blur of preparation. Dr. Park helped us understand what the ceremony would entail, helped prepare Ben for the attention and the crowds and the formal dinner where he'd have to sit through speeches in Swedish and English. We practiced small talk, practiced accepting congratulations, practiced all the social performances that didn't come naturally to him. Rachel came to every supervised visit. Never missed one. Never canceled. She brought books he liked, asked about his equations, learned to recognize when he was getting overwhelmed and needed space. She was learning his language, slowly, painfully, the way she should have learned it 9 years ago. I watched her transform, week by week, from the entitled woman who'd showed up with a lawyer to the humbled mother who sat quietly at my kitchen table, earning back fragments of her son's trust. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was something. We flew to Stockholm in early May. Me, Ben, Tom, who'd been there for every step of this journey, Dr. Park, and Rachel. The Academy had booked us rooms at the Grand Hotel, an elegant building overlooking the water that made Ben anxious until we found a quiet corner of our suite where he could set up his workspace. The ceremony was held at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, a stunning building that smelled like old books and history. Ben wore a suit we'd had specially made, soft fabric, no tags, seams on the outside where they wouldn't bother him. He looked so small standing there in the reception hall, surrounded by scientists and dignitaries and people who'd spent lifetimes accomplishing what he'd done in a kitchen in Ohio. Rachel stood next to me, both of us watching him from across the room. She'd worn a simple black dress, no jewelry, nothing flashy. She was trying to disappear, to not take up space in a moment that wasn't about her. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's so beautiful," and I almost missed all of it. I didn't respond. What was there to say? The ceremony itself was formal, dignified. They presented awards in several categories: astronomy, mathematics, biosciences, geosciences. Ben's was the mathematics prize. When they called his name, when he walked up to the stage with his careful, measured steps, when the presenter, a Nobel laureate in physics, knelt down and handed him the medal, I thought my heart would explode. The presenter spoke into the microphone, but loud enough for the hall to hear. "Benjamin, you have shown us that genius has no age, no limitations, no boundaries. You have changed how we understand the universe. Thank you." Ben held the medal, examining it with that focused intensity he brought to everything. Then he looked out at the audience, hundreds of people, all watching him, waiting, and spoke. "I want to thank my grandma," he said, his voice flat but clear. "She lets me work at her table. She cuts my pancakes into squares. She stays." He didn't mention his mother. Didn't mention the schools or the therapists or the doctors or NASA or MIT or anyone else who'd been part of his journey. Just me. And the fact that I stayed. The audience applauded. Standing ovation. Tears on faces that usually dealt in cold equations and empirical data. And I stood there crying, Tom's arm around my shoulders, while my grandson received one of the world's highest honors. Rachel was crying too, silent sobs that shook her shoulders. She wasn't crying from joy. She was crying from grief, the recognition of everything she'd missed, everything she'd thrown away, everything she could have had if she'd just been brave enough to stay. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Ben lasted about 40 minutes before the noise and the crowds became too much. I took him back to the hotel, helped him into his comfortable clothes, set him up with his notebooks and pencils. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked. "That was loud," he said. "But it was okay. People seemed happy. They were happy because of you. Because you're brilliant." He looked at me, really looked at me, and said something that made me understand that despite everything, the autism, the social challenges, the way his brain worked so differently from everyone else's, he understood exactly what mattered. "Grandma, being brilliant is easy. The numbers just tell me what to do. But you stayed when Mom left. That's harder than any equation." I pulled him into a hug, one of the few physical contacts he truly tolerated, and held him while he let me, his small body against mine, this miracle of a boy who saw the truth, even when adults tried to hide it. Being brilliant was easy. Staying was hard. And I'd chosen hard. Every day for 21 months I'd chosen hard. That night, Rachel knocked on our hotel room door. Ben was asleep, finally, exhausted from the day. I stepped into the hallway to talk to her. "I'm not going to fight the custody arrangement," she said without preamble. "I spoke to Gerald. I'm dropping everything. Supervised visits are fine. More than I deserve, honestly." I studied her face. She looked older than 32, worn down by regret and loss. What changed? Today, watching him thank you. Realizing that I had 9 years to be the person he needed, and I spent most of them wishing he was different. Wishing he was easier. And you took him exactly as he was and loved him enough for both of us. She wiped her eyes. I can't undo what I did. I can't get those years back. But I can stop making it worse. I can show up on Sundays and sit at your kitchen table and be grateful for whatever pieces of him he's willing to give me. That's all I deserve. Rachel, no, Mom, let me finish. You were right. About everything. I was selfish and weak, and I abandoned my son when he needed me most. But you're the bravest person I know, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be half the parent you are. She kissed my cheek, whispered, "Thank you," and walked back to her room. I stood in that elegant hotel hallway in Stockholm, Sweden, 4,000 miles from my kitchen table in Ohio, and I finally let myself believe it. We were going to be okay. Ben and me. We'd survived the worst and come out the other side. The boy nobody wanted had become the genius everyone celebrated. But more importantly, he'd become himself, complicated and brilliant and loved exactly as he was. And I'd become the mother I always should have been to Rachel, and the grandmother Ben needed me to be. Sometimes love means staying when everyone else walks away. Sometimes it means fighting for someone who can't fight for themselves. Sometimes it means square pancakes and kitchen tables and showing up again and again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. If this story has meant something to you, if you've stayed with us through all of it, leave me a comment. Tell me you're here. Tell me you see us. Because every story needs witnesses, and every fight needs people who care enough to remember why it mattered. We've been home from Stockholm for 3 months now. Life has settled back into something resembling normal. If normal can include a 9-year-old who's revolutionizing theoretical physics, and whose medal from the Royal Swedish Academy sits on the bookshelf next to his collection of toy cars. Ben still works at the kitchen table, still lines up his cars by color before bed, still needs his pancakes cut into perfect squares. The world has changed around him. The interviews, the attention, the university's already recruiting him for programs that won't start for another decade. But Ben himself remains exactly who he's always been. That's the thing about genius. It doesn't change who you are. It just reveals who you've always been. Rachel comes every Sunday. She's never missed a visit in 14 months now. She sits at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, the one where her son solved the unsolvable, and she watches him work. Sometimes she asks questions. Sometimes she just sits quietly, being present, learning what it means to be his mother even though she lost the right to that title a long time ago. Last Sunday, Ben surprised us both. He was working on something new. Always something new, his brain never still, never satisfied. When he suddenly looked up at Rachel. "Mom," he said. It was the first time he'd called her that. In all the supervised visits, all the tentative rebuilding, he'd never used that word. Just Rachel, or sometimes nothing at all. She froze, her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "Yes? Do you want to see what I'm working on?" It was such a small thing, such an ordinary thing. But in that moment, in that question, was forgiveness. Not complete, not unconditional, but real. A door opening just slightly, just enough to let a little light through. Rachel set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. I'd love to. I watched them sit together at the table, Ben explaining his equations in his matter-of-fact way, Rachel listening with an attention that bordered on desperate. She still didn't understand the math. None of us really did except Dr. Park, but she understood something more important. This was a gift. A second chance she'd done nothing to earn but everything to need. When the visit ended, when Susan the monitor had noted everything in her little book, and Rachel was putting on her coat to leave, Ben said something else. "You can come back next week if you want." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. They always filled with tears these days, like she'd sprung a leak she couldn't fix. "I'd like that. Thank you, Ben." He nodded and went back to his cars, already arranging them for the night. The conversation filed away. But Rachel stood there for a long moment, looking at her son, and I saw it on her face. Hope. Fragile, uncertain, but real. After she left, I sat down at the table across from Ben. "That was very kind, what you said to your mom." He looked up at me, his dark eyes serious. "She's trying. People should get chances when they're trying." "Yes." I said softly. They should. Grandma? His fingers started tapping against his leg, that familiar sign that he was about to say something difficult. If Mom gets better at being a mom, will you still be here? My heart broke and healed in the same moment. Always, Ben. I'll always be here. No matter what happens with your mom, no matter where you go or what you do, I'll always be here. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his work. The conversation was over for him, but I sat there for a long time, watching him. This miracle of a boy who'd taught me that love isn't about biology or legal documents or who gave birth to whom. Love is about showing up, about staying, about cutting pancakes into squares and letting someone work at your kitchen table and being there for the hard parts, not just the celebrations. Last week, I got another call. Not from Sweden this time, but from MIT. They want Ben to participate in a special summer program, 2 weeks on campus, working with Dr. Park and her team, fully accommodated for his needs, with me staying in a campus apartment the whole time. I asked Ben if he wanted to go. He thought about it for 3 days, really thought about it, weighing the numbers against the disruption to routine, the new experiences against the security of home. Finally, he said yes, but only, he specified, if I came too, and if he could bring his cars, and if someone promised they'd have square pancakes. MIT agreed to all of it. Of course they did. They were getting Benjamin Torres, the boy who solved NASA's propulsion problem at 8 and won the Crafoord Prize at 9. They could handle square pancakes. Rachel asked if she could drive us to the airport when we leave next month. Not come on the trip. She knew better than to ask that, but just drive us. Be part of the beginning of this new adventure, even if only for the car ride. I told her I'd ask Ben. He said yes. She could drive us. Small steps. That's how trust is rebuilt. Not in grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but in Sunday visits and car rides to the airport and showing up consistently, even when it's hard. This morning, I was making breakfast, square pancakes, always square, when Ben came into the kitchen with his backpack. Inside was a notebook, worn at the edges from constant use, filled with equations that would take me a lifetime to understand. Grandma, can I show you something? Of course, sweetheart. He opened the notebook to a page near the back. At the top, in his careful handwriting, was a title. Why Love is Like Mathematics. Below it, he'd written, Love is like mathematics because both require showing your work. You can't just say the answer. You have to prove it, step by step, line by line, day by day. And sometimes you make mistakes. But if you go back and fix them, and show how you got to the right answer, that's when you really understand it. Grandma showed her work. She proved the equation. That's how I know it's real. I read it 3 times, tears blurring the words. Then I pulled him into a hug, one of his rare tolerances of physical affection, and held him while he let me. I love you, Ben, I whispered. More than all the equations in the world. I know, he said. You proved it. Tonight, after Ben is asleep, I'll sit at this kitchen table, the one where a thrown-away boy became a celebrated genius, where an exhausted grandmother became a mother again, where a family broke apart and slowly, painfully, started to heal. And I'll think about everything we've survived. The abandonment, the custody fight, the fear and the hope and the impossible choices. The way love sometimes looks like letting someone fail so they can learn how to try again. The way genius can emerge from trauma, and strength can come from being chosen instead of being born into a place. I'll think about Rachel, showing up every Sunday, earning back pieces of her son's trust one visit at a time. I'll think about Ben, brilliant and complicated and kind, teaching us all that being different isn't the same as being broken. I'll think about all the people who said I was too old, too poor, too uneducated to raise a special needs prodigy. And I'll think about how they were all wrong. Because raising Ben wasn't about money or education or youth. It was about love, the kind that shows up, the kind that stays, the kind that cuts pancakes into squares and lets a child work at your kitchen table and fights for them when the whole world says they're not worth fighting for. Ben is sleeping down the hall, his toy cars lined up on the windowsill, his Craftford prize medal catching the moonlight, his genius brain finally quiet for a few hours. Tomorrow he'll wake up and fill more notebooks with equations that will change the world. But tonight, he's just a little boy who knows he's safe, who knows he's loved, who knows his grandma stayed. And in the end, that's the only equation that really mattered. Love plus presence equals home. Showing up plus staying equals family. Sacrifice times consistency equals the kind of security that lets a brilliant, broken boy become exactly who he was always meant to be. The kitchen table is clean now, ready for tomorrow's square pancakes and new equations, and whatever impossibilities Ben decides to solve next. This table has witnessed miracles, has held the weight of genius and grief and second chances and stubborn love that refused to give up. It's just a table. Oak. Old. Scratched from years of use. But it's also where everything changed, where a grandmother became a mother, where an abandoned boy became a celebrated genius, where a family broke and slowly started to mend, where love proved itself, line by line, day by day, square pancake by square pancake. And that's the story. Not of a prodigy who solved an impossible problem, but of the woman who loved him enough to let him try. Not of autism or genius or fame, but of showing up and staying and being exactly what someone needed when everyone else walked away. This is the story of Ben and me, of Rachel learning what it means to be a mother, of a kitchen table in Ohio that changed the world, not because of the equations written on it, but because of the love that held space for those equations to exist. Thank you for staying with us, for witnessing this journey, for seeing Ben, really seeing him, not as a genius or a prodigy or a headline, but as a boy who deserved to be loved exactly as he was. If this story moved you, if it changed something in you, if it reminded you that the hardest kind of love is the kind that stays, leave me a comment. Tell me your city. Tell me your story. Tell me about the person you stayed for, or the person who stayed for you, because that's what we do. We witness each other's struggles and victories. We say, I see you. Your fight matters. Your love matters. You matter. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there will be more stories, more kitchen tables, more impossible loves that refuse to give up. But for now, for tonight, this story is complete. The boy nobody wanted changed the world, and the grandmother who refused to let him go changed him. Square pancakes and all.